I switched from a big, heavy gimbal that could weigh up to 15 pounds when fully rigged out, down to this little Ronin RS3 Mini. And it weighs about half that at only 7.5 pounds when fully set up. But did I make a mistake by switching to a much smaller gimbal? And what am I missing out on now that I was getting with this setup? Let's find out. So I've been shooting with the Zhiyun Crane 2S for a couple years now, and I really love this gimbal, but it's pretty heavy, especially when you add a lot of other accessories to it. And I was on a shoot a few months ago and basically threw out my back an hour into the shoot carrying this gimbal around. And I was like, well, that's the straw that broke my back. I've got to switch to a lighter setup. I'll keep working on my fitness so it gets stronger. A lot of times I will add things like a wireless transmitter, and this is perfect when you're doing live events and you have to transmit your image back to the switcher so that you can be streaming, but roaming around the event hall. So it starts to get a lot heavier when I add things like this. And then if I'm filming outside, what I've been using is the Polar Pro Base Camp. You've seen this on the channel many, many times for years. I absolutely love it. It's a V&D and you can put all different filters in it. They'll have these nice, rims on them so that you don't touch the glass. Absolutely love that. But it is a bit heavier. Even with the matte box removed and everything, it can be quite a bit heavier. Every ounce counts when you're carrying it in your arms all day and your back has to hold it up. We've also got a follow focus mounted on 15mm rods here so I can pull focus manually, but sometimes it's not necessary. And usually I just like to run with autofocus lenses when I'm using a gimbal. So let's take a look at the setup that I'm using now and talk about some of the trade-offs. I'm gonna get everything switched over. To get your RS3 Mini set up, there's a couple things that you need to know first. So they give you this little Arca Swiss plate that you can mount on the bottom of any camera, and it just uses a 1/4-20 thread. So you could do this with or without a cage. So I'll get this plate on. There we go. Now it's mounted. Now with the RS3 Mini, this is the adapter plate that it comes with. And this plate runs back and forth. Okay, so kind of a north and south orientation that the camera is going to slide in. So you can see that now I've got the camera mounted, but because we had to add this plate, the camera is sitting that much higher now. See this gap between this plate and above? So that means that it's going to be that much harder to balance it because it has a higher center of gravity now. And you want the center of gravity to be as low as possible. So I'm going to show you how we can accomplish that now. We'll remove the Arca Swiss base plate that comes with it and set this aside because we don't need it. Because on the bottom of my camera, it's actually an Arca Swiss plate all the way down. Now, your camera cage may not have Arca Swiss, but if you can find one with Arca Swiss on the bottom, it's really the best because it's just so easy to use. Here we go. So remove this piece that comes with it. So instead, you're going to use this part from SmallRig, and I'll link it down below so you can easily find it. This is an Arca Swiss adapter plate built specifically for the RS3 Mini. And we're going to slide it onto this lower bar here. Just like that. And lock it off. So we'll go ahead and put my camera right on without any extra adapters and tighten this knob in the back. And you can see that center of gravity is that much lower now. We removed that extra height that we were getting from the adapter plate. So this will help balance the camera. The next thing that I'm doing differently now is instead of using the Polar Pro Base Camp, which is way too heavy to actually balance on this rig, I'm using screw-on variable ND filters. Sometimes I use this one from Polar Pro, which is the Helix Maglock. It's super high quality, and I really like the results that I get with it, but it's a little bit more pricey at $300. So an even cheaper alternative is this one from Freewell. It's also a magnetic VND filter that goes from 3 to 7 stops, and you can just throw it on the front of your lens. So for today's build, I'm gonna go with a little bit more of the budget route. So in order to mount this, there's a little adapter ring that comes with it, and then it just magnetizes to the front. There we go. And because you don't want it to fall off, use these two little knobs on either side to lock the filter onto your lens. And you can see just how much smaller and lighter this is than using something like this. The camera and lens setup that I'm using here is the Sony FX3 with a cage on it and the 16 to 35 G Master lens, which is a pretty heavy lens. I find that the little LCDs on the back of your camera just don't work that well. It's really hard to see exposure and critical focus. So I'm gonna add this Ninja 5 to my setup. And the way that I do this is with a little monitor arm. This one's from SmallRig. They didn't sponsor this video. I actually bought this arm because I used a very similar one from SmallRig on my Crane 2S, and I absolutely love the setup. So this one has a little NATO mount on it. So I just slide it onto the side here. And then I just screw my monitor right onto it. And I love it because you can just put the monitor at whatever angle you want and it stays there. So if you're going really low angle, you can tilt it back just as much as you need and everything like that. Maybe you're going high above and you want to see your monitor, whatever it is. It's really good for viewability. I'll show you why I keep the cage on my camera. Obviously I could take that off and make this setup all a little bit lighter, but I find it to be advantageous because I have the HDMI lock. And if you use a gimbal, you know that a lot of times this HDMI cable gets pretty thrown around, and I definitely don't want it to break my HDMI port on the Sony FX3. Nice, so it's handling this just fine. The motors have no issues holding up the Sony FX3 with the 16 to 35 G Master, a VND filter, and a cage. It's doing just fine with this setup. And I've been rocking this for about 3 months now, but it hasn't all been perfect switching over to a smaller gimbal like the RS3 Mini. So what have been some of the downsides of using a smaller gimbal like this? The first one is that this is really the biggest camera body and lens combo that you're going to get to balance on this. It's really designed for the 16 to 35 G Master and the 24 to 70 G Master. Those are pretty much the largest lenses. There ain't no way that you're gonna get something like the 70 to 200 to balance on this setup. It's just way too big. You gotta use a larger gimbal. But I think you gotta be a little bit crazy to be rocking a 70 to 200 on a gimbal. That's a pretty peculiar shot. And that brings me to the next thing, is that you really can't use this with a follow focus. There's nowhere to mount it underneath. Usually there's a base plate to put it on. And I could do it from the top here with 15mm rods, but it ends up being just a little bit too heavy to get that proper balance. So if you're running a gimbal like this, you've just got to be using autofocus. You're really not going to be able to use your manual focus lenses unless you just set them to infinity and forget about it. The next thing is power consumption. Now, DJI advertises on their website that the RS3 Mini battery life is 10 hours. And I call BS. There's no way this lasts for 10 hours. I was just shooting with it last week on a full day shoot, and the RS3 Mini died after 4 hours of shooting. Only 4 hours. And I had it balanced as well as you can balance it. But I guess with a larger camera and lens setup like this that I was using, it actually doesn't last that long. So I don't know where they got that 10-hour rating from. Maybe it's using a much smaller camera body like the A7C and like a little tiny prime lens. Maybe it'll last 10 hours. And because the battery is built into this, you can't just swap it out for a brand new charged up battery on set like you can with the bigger brother, like the Ronin RS3. You really have to recharge this thing, which takes about 2.5 hours, which on set, you're just not gonna have time for that. But luckily, I have found a solution for this. So there's a USB-C port for recharging it on the side, and you can actually operate the gimbal while it's recharging. So let me show you what I came up with. So this is a pretty cool setup that I haven't actually seen anyone do before. So normally to power the Ninja 5 or any monitor, I'm just using a Sony NPF battery, throw it on the back, and there we go, it powers my monitor. But for this setup, not using these, I'm actually gonna be using this adapter. And this is a Sony NPF to V-mount adapter. And I just picked this up on Amazon. I think it was around 30 bucks. It was pretty affordable. I'll link all the parts that I used today down below in the description if you wanna pick any of them up. Let's slide this right on. Now let's throw a V-mount battery on, and what I'm using today is this one from SmallRig. It's their 50 watt hour. It's a little bit more slim than their 99 watt hour, and I like using this one because it's just that much less weight to carry around. There we go. The monitor is now powered, and of course the key thing that we're gonna be doing here is getting power from this battery to the gimbal. So I'm just using a simple USB-C to USB-C cable, and on the top of this battery, there's a USB-C port. So I'll go ahead and plug directly into that. And then I'm just gonna plug this right into the side of the RS3 Mini right here. If you're worried about running out of gimbal power on a long shoot, now you don't have to. You've got a V-mount battery powering it, and of course you can swap this out if it dies quickly. Yes, it's all a little bit heavier now, but I think it's a worthy trade-off if you have a really long shoot, and it's still less weight than my original setup. Now, one extra bonus to adding a V-mount battery to this setup is that you can also power the camera. So you just need a cable like this, and this is D-tap to Sony Z battery, or whatever camera you have, you can get something like this that goes D-tap to your dummy battery. So I could just plug this into the side of the V-mount battery here. There we go. And then I can put this right into the camera. Now, because it's mounted, of course, it's hitting right into the battery slot, so I do have to take this off really quick. And we're going to throw this into the camera. And what I do is actually just leave the battery door on because it closes just enough to still work on the Ronin. So you can see that now it's fully getting all of its power from this dummy battery. So that's something pretty cool about this setup, is that now everything is powered off of this single V-mount battery. The camera, the monitor, and the Ronin. Obviously it's going to deplete your battery life a lot quicker having all three of these things plugged into it, but you could just plug in whatever you need and of course swap out the V-mount battery as needed. The last thing that I'm gonna add to this setup is totally optional, but if you need to run audio, you gotta have a microphone. So you might wanna use something like this little Rode Wireless Pro. It's extremely lightweight and compact, and it's got a little clip on it. So you could just throw this right into the cold shoe and then run the cable up into your camera. And that keeps the weight off of the camera so you don't have to worry about balancing it. I just ran this exact audio setup a week ago with the host, having them walk me through their campus, and this was just perfect, and they were wearing a lavalier. We could go anywhere, and it really didn't add any bulk or weight to my setup. If your clients are like mine and they're starting to ask for a lot of vertical shoots for social media, you can mount this camera vertically on the RS3 Mini. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like in just a sec. We're still going to use this Arca Swiss adapter plate from SmallRig, but we need to remove it. So I'll just pull the lever and slide it off of this bottom arm. And we can actually remove this piece. We're not going to use it when using vertical mounting. So just pull that lever, and then there's a little release tab here on the bottom. So it'll allow me to pull this off. So just set this aside for when you need to film horizontally again. Take that SmallRig Arca Swiss adapter, and we're gonna slide it in from the top here. There we go, and lock it off. So again, we're just going right onto the Arca Swiss, and I'm going to put it on like this. And I'm tightening down that knob in the front here. Now we're ready to shoot vertically once I balance the gimbal again. Now it is totally balanced for vertical shooting in this setup. And I know you guys are probably doing a lot of this like I am, doing reels and TikToks and things in the vertical setup. I never thought this day would come, but it definitely has. And luckily it works with the RS3 Mini setup. There's no issues with anything hitting or anything like that. Another pro of this smaller gimbal setup is that it fits into my camera bag really well. So if you do a lot of travel filmmaking, this thing is perfect. It really doesn't weigh very much. I think it's about 2.5 pounds itself. And you can just throw it into the side pocket here, or if you have a larger roll top like I do, you can throw it in here. And it all fits just fine. A few things that you should know that are different from the larger Ronin RS3 and the RS3 Pro is that you can only mount accessories on one side. So if you like to rock dual handles on both sides, you're not going to be able to do that with this gimbal setup. It also doesn't allow you to attach the power base plate that you can with the Ronin RS3, which is, it lets you take this handle off and then mount it directly onto another power base plate, so you can use it on car rigs and things like that. But for me personally, I don't use or need those things, so this is totally fine for me. Something else you should know is that when you power off your Ronin, it doesn't do that nice, easy power off and kind of lock up into place like with the Ronin RS3 or RS3 Pro. it just kind of drops into loosey-goosiness again. Overall, I'm really happy with this new smaller, lighter setup, and you can go as minimalistic and small as you want with just the gimbal and camera if you want. And I've been really impressed with the RS3 Mini. It's just as smooth and as good as any other gimbal that I've used. It has no issues getting really nice, smooth, beautiful shots. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Would you switch to a smaller gimbal like this? Let me know down in the comments below. All right, I'll see you in the next video.